Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here and joining us on this talk. Welcome to the Tashkeel Talks series. My name is Hiba Farhad. I am the Professional Practice Coordinator at Tashkeel. The Tashkeel Talks series features inspiring practitioners in the UAE working at the forefront of visual art and design. It seeks to shine a spotlight on inspiring practices and provide important insights. Today, we are so lucky. We welcome Sawsan Al Bahar, a cross-disciplinary architect and artist. Sawsan combines contemporary architecture production processes with traditional art production techniques. Her subject matter lies in looking at the meaning of time to the people of the Middle East, often by referencing the past. She is inspired by themes of time, politics, and history within the Middle East and aims to record that history through her work and document the states that are singular to this region. Sawsan has participated in numerous exhibitions. The title of Sawsan's talk is Drawings Double. As an artist based in Dubai, Sawsan will share with us her artistic practice, taking us through how it all starts with a 3D scanned image of objects and spaces, to then explore her meticulously drawn poetic entanglements that are at the crossroads of a time that arises from the future. Just a few housekeeping rules before we begin. Please keep your microphone on mute during the talk. Feel free to type your comments and questions in the chat zone, or you can save them up for the Q&A session with Sawsan at the end. Please note that this session is being recorded. And finally, we welcome Sawsan. Sawsan, I leave the floor to you.
Thank you, Hiba. Hi, everybody. You can hear me well?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, let me just share my screen to begin. Okay. Oop. Oop. Sorry, sneak peek. How do I get rid of this thing? Can I? Oh, yeah. All right. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to take a slightly convoluted approach to this talk today, but I promise eventually it will become chronological. So just bear with me. Hiba, this quote is for you. Hiba and I were debating about the relationship between art and technology last night. And technology plays a big role in my current work, at least the relationship between art and reality and technology. And this quote is by John Lasseter. He is the producer of Toy Story. So first, I'm going to introduce to you 3D scanning and why it first gripped my interest in 2016. 3D scanning essentially is a tool that utilizes photometry and image data to record information in 3D form, in digital 3D form. So essentially, you have an object, you take photos from a 360 view, and what happens is the computer utilizes photos, firstly, data as color and as depth through value, as well as points in space to recreate the object in a 3D model. And today, this is becoming an extremely accurate way of making replicas, digital replicas of objects and spaces. It's being used by medicine, in science, archaeology, museums, and we're now starting to see some art research collectives, data artists, and it's starting to become a part of maybe like the creative world. I remember when I visited and now both the NEOS and the Smithsonian museums have 3D digitization labs they're basically creating virtual or digital archives of their collections. Again, this technology can take extremely accurate information of form, color, and light. So I remember when I visited the museum in Berlin last time, there was a completely accurate replica of the Nefertiti bust. And it was not only accurate in form and scale, but also in color and texture. Except this one, you could touch and you could look at closely and you could, engage with in ways you can't with the original. So that's one interesting way that we're seeing this, the potentials and the parameters of this tool. A data artist I follow online uses digital scanning to virtually preserve and virtually keep track of her usage of plastic. And this very interesting project as well, that maybe I can show you online, is a project by C Projects. They're an art collective, and they created for the Venice Biennale last year, the Architecture Biennale, they created an archive or a record, even created an index of disappearing and endangered wetlands and wetland environments in Victoria. And this was presented in the virtual Venice Biennale for the Italian pavilion. Again, like a really unique image, because we're now looking at something that combines data, combines photography, and 3D modeling. And so this is why it's not very familiar in terms of texture and color and form, because it's a combination of three and it's a very new type of image. Again, here's someone I also follow online who's doing really interesting image research, three-dimensional image research. And with this information being available now, we're seeing some artists start to engage with it, though in my opinion, it's remained for the most part in the digital world. But some playful applications of the fact that we now have all these models virtually archived, completely accurate, and can play around with them. I have yet, though, to see it being truly used as maybe a creative tool, but again, there are some people starting to play around with it in really interesting ways. So when I first came across this technology, and at the time I was making work that looks like this, I was quite obsessed with depicting the figure. I should remove this. I was quite obsessed with removing the figure, with portraying the figure. I was working around themes of what happens when the things that make up our identity are lost or are taken from us, whether it's language or land or culture, and what are the implications of that. And at the time, I was trying to do this through displaced and dismembered or disfigured human figures, and I was all over the place. I was trying different things. I was overproducing, and it just felt like I wasn't really there. So when I first came upon 3D scanning, and this is a time where it was becoming accessible to the public in end of 2016, I was able to download an app on my phone and scan an object, and through a cloud on my computer access it. And I was immediately struck by the visual and the process based qualities. I was struck by the technical qualities. I was struck by it as a drafting tool. It's a new form of drafting tool. And so I started to play around with it. First, I was scanning myself. I was scanning myself in the studio, and I was playing around with that. And I think that what I started to do was pretty much replicate the same approach I was replicate the same approach I was dealing with in my other work, paintings, these kind of structures and sculptures. I was just using 3D scans as a reference for to do the same thing. And it just felt like that's not what I'm finding so attractive about these new technologies and this new drafting tool. And so I started to do something a little bit different. Again, this was all from this first phase. I started to create these clusters or sketches digitally of objects and spaces that don't belong together. I started to initially combine models from different places, from Syria, from Palestine, from Dubai. I began inserting myself in these spaces and places in a way that maybe is like a sort of convoluted or twisted romanticism, putting myself in a place that is inaccessible because of various limitations of time and space and war, and just seeing what happens. So eventually, though, instead of drawing this figure these figures, and again, we're looking at a very complex image, I started to begin of thinking of documenting these places that I now had access to, even if as a virtual imprint. And places that in an alternative universe would have been places that would have been accessible to me, or that would have been mine. I started scanning parts of the home in Damascus, or finding places in Jaffa or Jaffa, a city in Palestine from which my grandfather comes. Scanned by other people online, I could now find that and look at it and explore it and transform it into something, into anything I wanted. So I started to make drawings and artifacts and trying to think of image and space in a new way. So a ground that was really never really solid. These are a set of 2 drawings, first drawings. And it's a floor pattern, a familiar floor pattern in perspective. And when I started drawing them, I actually realized how much I was interested in the process itself. There are so many doubles and so many tensions between the hand and the machine, between a digital draftsmanship and an analog draftsmanship, between what is real and what is fabricated, what is geometric and abstract versus an image and a representation, what is material and what is virtual. So I think this is the first drawing that I started with, and I began tracing at first. It was actually quite difficult to figure out how to draw this by hand. I started using a light table at first and started to try to think how the inconsistency of the hands could transform the image, and how can I make my mark on this ground through line weight and through texture. Again, the problem was really bringing this out into the physical world and making it physical, because it was really quite difficult and quite time consuming. But I wanted to see what would happen and how these models would transform because of a different process. And I really wanted to destroy the digital aspect. I wanted to destroy that, and I wanted the hand to take precedence, and eventually I figured that I could really highlight those tensions that I was just earlier talking about. And even through title, a ground that was never really solid, is not only a play on the fact that this image is fabricated and is not based on an object or isn't real, and that it's geometric and it's abstract, but at the same time it's representative, but also the thematic tensions, or the thematic notions, excuse me, that I was mentioning earlier. Ground that was never really solid. Is it a map? Is it a spill? Ground can be a metaphor for land and earth and home, and a ground that was never really solid. So I started to think of how I can use titles in ways to bring these ideas that I'm interested in out. And again, here with this one, it was much less tracing, and I started to make my own marks on this ground, even leaving a stain, and started to see how I can, the hand can have a part to play and not only the computer, and how, what transformations were going to happen by me making it. Again, here's a close-up to see how pressure and line weight and time even can transform an image or transform a drawing. And you know, these were, it was quite frustrating, and I had to be quite disciplined in order to work on these, because at times it feels a little bit stupid even, or even like I'm racing with a computer almost. But it felt like I was looking at it as a tool that preserves the past, and is a tool for preserving the past and exploring the future at the same time, and accessing places as digital imprints, like I was saying earlier, crossing all kinds of boundaries. And I also started to think that it's a way to blur the lines, or now, like I see these as blurring the lines and boundaries between material and digital culture. This is later on, I started to render in order to, again, add more of the hand. And I think maybe in some moments I was more successful than others. And I think maybe it's quite possible to tell which ones were more successful, and the drawings keep oscillating between what is more successfully physical and what is still a little bit digital. And I actually don't think of these as finished works or drawings. They're more explorations to me, or even research. In The Force of Estrangement, this is I think the largest work to yet, is a pillow that's been slept on. Again, I'm thinking of notions of presence and absence, dreams. A pillow is, you know, the basic unit of comfort in a home. This is quite large. And again, I was quite tied by the format. So I ended up tiling the drawings based on my tools and what was available to me. It was quite a challenge. There was a twofold, the challenges were twofold. Firstly, it was eradicating and destroying the digital as I bring these out to make them physical objects or physical drawings. And secondly, and it was a question, like, how am I going to take this from a computer that is, you know, if they're too small, the texture disappears. If they're too large, it's going to be too much work and it's going to become too huge, and I can't print that big, and I can't have a table that large to work on. And so it really became a problem-solving question with every drawing. And then the other question was, how do I eradicate and lose the digital and the computer, and assert the physical hand and drawing as a critical tool? I remember thinking, I remember once in university, a professor had asked us, why do we draw? And I remember everyone's response was to understand, because that's what we were led to believe we should say as architects. And I remember thinking, actually, I think we draw because to become a part of something we admire. And I think that's the case, whether we're looking at Michelangelo's figure studies and sketches, or a children's, you know, or child's portrait of their family. I draw to become a part of something I admire. Here I had started to change my process a little bit. Untitled Study for Loss. This is around 2018. I started to do transfers. So I would do graphite transfers and sometimes do monoprints with graphite mixed with oil, in which I would print the image, and then with graphite dust or with pencil, basically fill the opposite side with it, and then very slowly draw from the front the drawing and push through the image onto the final paper, basically. And then go back and add little points and touches and drawings. And you know, it's again, it created a completely different texture. We start to see the image appearing and appearing and disappearing in some places, which I also really really enjoyed. Another one where I was transferring using graphite. This is a door, front door of, I think, my grandmother's house in Damascus. Again, I was getting my cousin to send me photos and then stitching them online, and then extracting or removing the photographic information. And I'll show you some of this stuff once I'm done with the presentation. And then using the computer to simplify these images into lines or dots or triangles or meshes. So here again, I really like the central part of this because it's really, you can really see that contention between a more digital texture and a more chaotic and hand created texture. I think drawing is really tactile, and for me, graphite is ephemeral, and it has textures and shadows that paint doesn't, at least for me, doesn't achieve. There's an artist called Robert Lungo who creates really large, hyper-realistic charcoal drawings, and he refers to it as creating art from dust, which I think is a very poetic way to think about it. But I was thinking of the ways that I could use all the grays that graphite offers to counter that very pristine and hyper clean and high-res black and white, super contrast digital image by the texture and the grays, levels of gray and layers that graphite offers, and even the inaccuracy. This is a more recent work during the lockdown. Funnily enough, it took on a whole new lot of meanings. And this was at Tashkeel last year. It's a self-portrait, but again, I had just come back actually in 2019 from an academic drawing course in Florence. So I was trying to model the image in ways that more academic, while allowing some of that initial mesh to come through. Some details. Another one, this is a scan that I found online of a house on the same street from a family member. Again, I was able to access this because of websites that now have people uploading all their 3D scans, and some are for sale and some are free, and some you can download, and some are point clouds and some are meshes. It's quite fascinating as an archiving tool, and being able to peer into people's worlds and lives and bedrooms and see what people think is worthwhile, is worth collecting. This is a more recent work. I was approaching this slightly differently, and I'll show you now how I actually ended up making this. I started with a point cloud, which is a model made of points of a tree, and then created a scene. And throughout all these drawings, after I scan the object, I create a scene. I strip it of something, I add something, I flip it around, I set up a scene, and then I extract the material, I edit the image. It's the complete opposite of what we usually do. We usually make the painting or the drawing. We take a picture and then we upload the picture on our computer and we edit and we Photoshop. This is the complete opposite. I start from the digital, I take it to Photoshop, I edit it, I create the scene that I want, and then I bring it out into a drawing. So here I had started, and I'll show you after I finish the presentation, I started with a single unit or a single tree that I then constructed a model out of and took this scene and then drew it by hand. And this is in my studio, that's why I haven't gotten a proper scan of it. It's just a photo. It's we just finished it. This is another that I'm working on, again, in the Forest of Estrangement is the title. It's the first painting I think I've done in years. It's in process, which is why it's still like this, but I'm working on something a little bit different. But this is the full image after I had created this. And again, I'll show you how I got to this from a single unit afterwards. NFTs. So again, something in Hiba and I were debating. I have been toying with the idea of NFTs. I'm not quite convinced, but I'm definitely curious. It just seems like maybe some of my work could lend itself to it naturally. But I think what I'm really trying to do is approach drawing through a contemporary lens and maintain the rigor and maintain a reserved and formal rigor and approach my materials in a sensitive and new way. And, you know, again, graphite is a very versatile and an impressive tool, and it can do so much. And I'm just really interested in that even as a not necessarily a artistic practice only, but as a research project. So let me show you. So for example, here, this is some of the models I was talking about that, so this is actually part of a project that some people are working on, creating an accurate digital model of Palmyra from photographs, old photographs that people have before it was destroyed. So they're collecting these photographs. There was an open call where they collected photographs from people who had photographed Palmyra before it was destroyed, and they're starting to put together digital models for whenever it's going to be possible to recreate it or conserve it. And it's quite interesting. This arch was destroyed, and here we have a digital an image and data replica of it. And these are what I was referring to as point clouds. They're just points of color in space that all together give you an image or a model. This is, again, this is an olive mill in Lifta in Palestine. So intriguing to be able to access something like this virtually and to look at it through this kind of lens of the computer. And I mean, I think it's beautiful, computer or not. I think visually it's beautiful, and I think there's so much potential to take these and work with them. And again, it's so fascinating to me to be able to access these places. Again, this is a bust from Palmyra. I like to look at it in the wireframe. You know, you can now look at this from here. If you wanted to draw it from here, you can. And the computer really understands form in a very different way than we do, because it doesn't see, when we analyze form based on light, we see shadow and we see light, and through that we have a three-dimensional form. There are variations in the shadows and there are planes in the light, and traditional academic drawing uses those to create a very realistic image, whereas the computer doesn't see light, so it transforms an object into meshes, and then the smaller scale, the tighter the mesh, and the bigger the form, the more sparse the mesh is. So it's based more on scale and complexity. So it's again a really interesting way of thinking about form, a new way of thinking about form and image. So initially I'll show you some of my models. I had used this single unit that someone had uploaded online of an orange tree. Oops, sorry. It's a point cloud, constructed space that pretty much ended up looking something like this. This is a screenshot. The digital model, again, I combined land and trees. And then I processed that and edited it to look more like this. So it was actually from this to this, and I'm now painting this. So we'll see how it transforms further. That's it, I think. I don't know if anyone has any questions or comments or feedback is super welcome. And yeah.
Thank you, Sawsan. This was a very intense talk that was full of, like, I've been trying to take notes that are like, you've gone through a lot of thoughts with regards to art, the idea of process, the intervention or intervening into an AI image, infiltrating it with domestic moments, creating clusters that are fictional, but yet also real. I mean, there's so much to go through. Also looking at this idea of intervening with the hand and this idea of drafting, going through this, what you defined as drawing in contemporary sense. Like, how do we look at drawing in relation to what we're kind of living in a very speculative, multi-future world? So there's so much to go through, and I'm gonna see if anyone on the floor is up for questions. Shall we open it for questions?
Yes, sure.
Okay, cool. So Leslie Gray has a comment. Thank you, Sawsan. Your work is gorgeous. I'm really interested about your thoughts on NFTs for your work specifically. As you say, you will pull these digital images and models back into the real world. How do you see remaking them digital as part of your process or not?
Yeah. Okay, that's a great question. And I don't know whether we want to debate NFTs or not, but so I'm not 100% convinced with NFTs. And I think, again, the transformations between a digital and a physical and the physical are so central to my work. So as far as my studio work goes, that's not going to change. On the other hand, I'm quite intrigued or curious by NFTs because we're seeing a lot of variations and quantity in digital art, and it's starting to assert itself. And I feel like it needs its own medium. I feel like it cannot, it cannot exist, at least for me, I'm speaking from my opinion, it cannot exist on the same plane as physical artworks. And I mean printing, I mean, it would have been so easy for me to just print these rather than spend hours and hours and hours drawing them. But it was so central to me, again, to assert the hand and to see what transformations happen when I make something by hand. So for me, as a studio, in my studio practice, I will never go digital. However, I am curious about it as a new medium. I'm curious about it as a again, as a kind of a technological advancement. And if I make work to become an NFT, it would most likely be related to my studio practice, but also not at all. It will be related, but not an exact copy, or not the same approach. I'm not going to make a painting into an NFT or vice versa. So I would approach it as a completely different path.
But I think like the shift, because your intervention is kind of intervening in this like cycle of AI images being produced by machines for machines, and then you intervene into that cycle.
Yeah.
in which you introduce this new notion of drawing in contemporary sense and draftsmanship.
Yeah.
In relation to the movement of the hand. So then when you kind of once you do that, the movement of that image that you've created then goes back to the digital.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. Again, I'm just toying with the idea, and I would have to maybe try to approach it differently, because like you're saying, the whole challenge or the whole question is, how do I destroy that digital quality as I draw these? So if I turn them into suddenly digital images, they've lost they've lost that importance and that meaning. And when I say I'm looking at drawing through a contemporary lens, I not only I'm interested in making drawing relevant again, and I'm interested in making academic drawing and rigorous process and simple material approached through a sensitive way, relevant today, not so yeah, maybe I would be competing with myself if I did that. But again, I'm curious. I would like to see what I could do, and how many variations of these can exist in the different, let's say, in the two different realms.
And you need to share once you figure that out.
I mean, we were also talking, there are really big environmental concerns when it comes to creating NFTs. It's how they get their value. They are minted by using up a huge amount of energy. And even for those who have no interest in saving the environment would stop and pause if they heard how much energy they utilize. So there is that question as well that I cannot ignore.
We have two other comments. Noor Majid is saying, "Hi Sawsan, I love that you're an architect/artist. I'm in the same boat. Actually, my question is kind of simple, but I always struggle to abstract real life. I tend to just urban sketch or copy references. How do you think we can transform our work from more realistic to abstracting the work? Any thoughts, exercises we can do, etc.?"
I don't think, first of all, I personally don't think there's anything wrong with representational work and with being inspired by nature. And I think I'm trying to remember who said that life, by drawing from life, I think is the first thing I would do rather than from an image. And drawing from life is almost spiritual, and it transforms anything you draw in ways that are hard to compete with. And then I would also say, think of narrative, think of combining objects that don't usually come together. Think of ways you can approach interior space versus exterior space. What are the qualities of an interior space that you can make it more interior, or an exterior space being more exterior? Is it a smaller drawing? Is it a tighter? Is it a sharper? Is it a sharper perspective? Can you exaggerate some qualities? Can you play around with color? Can you play around with scale? So there are many, many ways, even if you're going to be representing something, making a representational drawing, that you can transform an image into something new and something exciting and something maybe not as traditional as you'd like. I hope that answers it well.
Daniel Cardozo, I love your reason to draw, to become a part of something we admire. Do you see your future work shifting to explore the medium of color, or does the meaning of your work require you to maintain a black and white format?
That's a question I get a lot about color. And I mean, I admire and I love color when I see it in other people's works. But when it comes to my work, I always wanted to become just a simple value question of light and dark. And I don't really necessarily have an answer. Maybe I'm not very comfortable dealing with color. But even when I do use color, it tends to be more subdued. It tends to be less pronounced. I think, you know, again, like looking at these point clouds, I mean, there is so much potential to explore these through color for sure. I just, I don't know, I struggle with color. I even when I end up making a color image, I prefer it in black and white. I don't know why. It's just what I'm gravitating to, what I gravitate towards. I also think, you know, it can make a very complex thing much simpler to work with, because sometimes I can be very distracted with too many variables, and reducing the variables makes it a little bit easier for me to focus. Yeah.
I wonder, because you said something that was key as well, which is like reducing the variables in order to kind of navigate the complexity of the AI image. And I wonder if that is also part of this notion or the term that you keep kind of repeating, which is destruction, right? Like destroying that. And I would actually like you to speak towards that. Like, what is your conception of destruction? Because we know across history, destroying in like the art sense has gone through different phases, you know, whether iconoclast or burn, you know. So I'm kind of intrigued about this language of intervening into an AI image and also destroying it. What does that mean?
So first, you know, I actually think, again, going back to graphite and the pencil, I think it highlights texture. When you skip color, at least as far as my work is concerned, it allows texture and layers to come through, and it does, I think, transform the image. And so maybe for me, that's important as well. But so when you're talking about destroying the destroying the digital image. So when you look at this, it's a mesh. It's a very, very digital thing at its core. Not only in its visual language, but in the way it was created. So the challenge became, how do I get rid of that? How do I eradicate that from the image? And so it becomes more about its physicality. So when I say I want to destroy the digital, I mean in the drawing, I want the physical aspects to shine versus the original digital inception. And I think I succeed sometimes and I fail sometimes. And that's what I was saying, is the digital and the physical oscillate between different drawings. Some are more successful than others.
So then this question of spatiality. So basically, when you 3D scan an object, which some of the examples that you've shown us, they're like floating in space, right? Where you can kind of navigate them.
It doesn't understand context. It just it doesn't see space or comprehend space. It just even understands an object as a hollow shell.
So then when you drag these images into your process, then you're trying to situate them spatially. Yeah, I would say so. And you know, again, like if you look at what I was starting to with in digital form, like these are so complex. When it came to the problem of I need to draw them, I had to simplify and I had to take them one by one, and I had to look at object by object, because first of all, it was going to be relatively impossible to draw this from the get-go. And secondly, the more I zoom in and the more I simplify and the more I extract, the more I lose that digital context. Yeah, there's something about the machine image that kind of denies accessibility for humans at a certain level, right?
Yeah, it's very hard to do what the computer does.
Yes,
it's impossible even. So yeah, so I had to use my own brain and my own skill to try to come up with alternatives, and make my mark in a way that's going to compete again with the original image.
There's another question. Noor Majid says, how do you get your initial thoughts down? Do you write, use a sketchbook, just start straight with the digital process?
I actually often start with a title. I have a list of titles for works I've never made in my phone. But yeah, I do write. I sketch in my sketchbook a scene or an image or a drawing. And then I usually do a series of digital scans, and then I look at those, and then I think of how I can transform them to create a specific drawing. And I sometimes fool around with them, cut, move, edit. But usually I start with the title, and then I come up with the image for the title. So I write a lot, yeah.
The other thing that I also wanted to ask you about, because you brushed through, but we didn't really like kind of look into, which is this relationship with time. There is the time that you're drafting, the time that you're using, the physical process time of your hand, right?
Yeah.
Versus the time that is being produced in this AI image, which is like a future time. And then the kind of the destruction of both into this other time that you're imposing with these like domestic setups and memories that you're kind of putting over these two timelines. So I wonder if you can speak a bit about your definition of time, but also that general kind of process.
Yeah, I mean, I do think at the beginning, I just assumed the time it will take me to make these will transform the image. Like I just assumed that on its own is going to do it, because it takes so long, and it's very meticulous, and it's very difficult. So I do think that the time that it takes to make these has a relationship to the final outcome. And in terms of time in a domestic setting, I mean, that's quite interesting, because I feel like we experience time differently in different places. I don't know how I can tie that to my work, but I do look at, and I don't do it through drawings as much as through text. As I look at us, the Middle East, as people who are suspended in time because of all kinds of upheavals. We experience time in a very different way, I think, than the rest of the world. We are always waiting. We live in exile and in immigration and as refugees, and that all of that has an impact on the way we experience time. And I think waiting is a very common and shared experience for all of us. And so I write about that actually a lot, but I don't think it's quite related to my work. But I do like the comment about domesticity of these objects and spaces, and how time moves differently in different places and countries. I don't know if I answered you, but yeah, they take a long time to make.
I'm also intrigued about whether will you ever consider, because like sometimes when you see works of art, you never know the amount of time it takes to actually do these works. It's kind of hidden, the labor that goes into producing these works. And I wonder if there is a intention in some way to make that more visible in your works.
It's not an intentionally as much as for me, it's a need to spend time with the work. I need to spend a lot of time making it. It's just like a personal, like it fulfills a personal need. I also really admire, speaking of admiring, I admire skill and craft, and I would really like to find ways of incorporating that more into my work, maybe in even more efficient ways. But I like to spend time with the work. And actually, I think that even, even if you look at a 5-minute sketch that someone has drawn in their sketchbook, and it's quite nice, but it only took 5 minutes, that's not just 5 minutes. That's a series of 5 minutes. That's years of 5 minutes that have accumulated enough knowledge and skill to allow someone to make something in 5 minutes. So it's not that I need to spend that much time. It's that I like to, and it's that it takes that much time to make them at the moment. And I am trying in many ways to speed that up. Painting is one way. Transfers were one way. So there are many ways that I was trying to tackle that solution, because as the bigger and the more complex the work was going to be, the more it was going to be a little bit even unrealistic to achieve.
Wael Samhouri has a question. Hi, Sawsan. How do you think your architectural background affect your drawings and music?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, I was able to very quickly, once I discovered this technology through a phone app, very quickly understand how to use it, how to navigate it, because I already had the skill from my architecture background to work with it. So there was that. There's that technical aspect of being able to understand that. There's the aspect of being able to understand spatially objects, have a good understanding of objects and how they sit in space. And then I would say just the interest in space and place rather than anything else. Context. Yeah, I think it was quite technical, because even before this project in architecture school, I had come up with something very similar for my thesis that used architecture programs for more artistic or creative productions. And so I think that the tools I learned in architecture school helped me make use of this, and a critical mind and an understanding of drawing and drafting.
What about the sonic element? Because also he points out to that as well.
I don't play the piano anymore. He's referring to the fact that I used to play the piano for a long time, but I don't anymore. So it has no, at least not in the way I see it. It does not play a role at all.
But it's interesting, like the domesticity is extracted from the sonic. It's more the actual physical materiality rather than the materiality of sound as well.
That's an interesting way to put it, yeah.
I want to raise some of our some of the things that we kind of discussed with regards to like this idea of process. So I'd like you to speak towards, because you've like repeated this word process a lot in your lecture, and I think it says a lot about what you're trying to do and the way you're doing things. So I think maybe it might be interesting to kind of speak towards that as well.
Sorry, I don't really understand your question. You're asking about the importance of process to my work?
Yeah, it's like the idea of process, just like doing something, right? Versus doing something within a context, right?
Yeah. The formal level of a process. Yeah. So for me, I mean, it's often been very technical. Like my interest in process, like I have this problem and how am I going to solve it? And maybe I can try this and maybe I can try that. And can I print? And I feel like the best results always come out of that process, whether in design or architecture or art. And for in this process, as in drafting, the images are a direct result of the process and of trying to solve a problem. I needed to take this image out into the physical world, and I had to figure out how. I needed to minimize the amount of time I was spending. I needed to figure out scale. So for me, the process was trying to solve these problems as they come, and each work is a new problem and a new discovery. But in general, I think my interest in process when it comes to artistic practice is very technical. I like accidents and how we can take maybe an accident and turn it into something rigorous and explore it through research, not just rely continuously on happy accidents. I like the idea of using process to develop a certain craft, and craft can be very personal. And so a personal craft is something that I think depends on this idea of continuously solving problems on your own, in your studio, by yourself. And I think that, having a knowledge of more than one medium and more than one tool really helps. But in the end of the day, if you really want to develop something worthwhile, you have to hone in your skill in one direction. And so for me, I mean, in the beginning, I really only began to see results once I did that. And once I started to contend with these issues. Yeah, I think what we were talking about also the relationship between technology and image and art. And for me, technology, I mean, for everybody, technology and art have always been intertwined, and they've always borrowed from each other, and they've always developed together. And so it feels like my responsibility in a way to figure out what to do with what I have at hand today that maybe we didn't have at hand 20, 30 years ago. So there is that. I feel like, the machine is here to stay, and it's only going to take over more and more. So how can we use what it's giving us in our practice? Does that answer your question?
I mean, it does, but I think also the bigger question that we were also kind of debating is, yes, art and, technology go hand in hand, but should it be, should the ethical question extract itself from that coupling, right? Should, knowing what technology has been used for in different ways across different kind of fields, right?
So I'm laughing because I personally do not, I'm so sorry to say it like that, but I personally do not care about ethical questions when it comes to my work, because I'm trying to put myself in a box and explore this one thing. So I'm not asking myself these bigger questions. I'm just thinking of the narratives that I write and the narratives I can create with an image and how I can combine those. And I understand your point, and of course it's super important. And like we're saying, it all exists in a continuum and it's all related. But when I'm working in the studio on a day-to-day basis, I'm not asking myself these questions. I'm just asking myself, what is going to be the next step? How can I do this next time? What can I change? How can I make it colored? I don't ask myself these bigger questions.
I was thinking, because, when we were discussing this idea of time and the duration that things take in order to decipher the machine image in relation to what you're doing, right? Like how much time it takes to abstract, to extract things, to kind of figure out that machine image. I was thinking, is it because it is so complex that we find ourselves lost in the complexity, that it kind of pushes us to just be responding in terms of like problem solving, rather than also looking at things from a distance and kind of assessing it as a whole? But that's me poking, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. Like when I'm making work, it's so easy to get lost in the varieties and the possibilities and the numbers of let's say, models that I have access to, because again, there's an online archive where everyone is dumping their models. And I think, oh, it's going to be so, it can be extremely overwhelming. And again, the computer is a tool that can automate and customize at a hyper speed and replicate in ways that we can't. So I find it exhausting. And if too many things are taking my attention at once, for me, it's exhausting. So maybe that's another reason that I simplify by getting rid of color and drawing one thing at a time. Maybe to counter that's like overabundance of information and image all the time, and also very fast images all the time. You know, I mean, we're talking about time and how much it takes an image. I feel like it's become so easy to make a photograph or an image and to pop it out so quickly that it's, you know, we constantly, our span, our attention span is reducing, and also our expectation is increasing. We want things more and we want them faster. And I feel like this is the complete opposite, and maybe it forces me to slow down and to focus. And you know, it's not so stylish right now to be making a drawing once every 3 months. But I find value in it, in my practice.
Diego Arturo Mendoza Sanchez has a question. Hi, Sawsan, your work is quite complex. You talked at the very beginning about your work having a romantic element to it. I'm interested to know how much does that come to play in a process that is so technical and rigorous?
My outlook on it and the titles, I think, for sure. The objects I choose, again, we're talking about domestic objects. The oscillation between absence and presence and the relationship to home. I'm looking at objects that are typical in any home, a pillow, a door, a chair, a floor, and that are always unique to a specific environment. And, you know, this pattern to anyone from my region is immediately familiar and nostalgic. So I think by looking at objects that firstly are familiar and nostalgic and domestic, that speak of absence and presence, and that are maybe metaphors for home. Because at the end of the day, I'm trying to archive and document objects and places that are inaccessible to me, and that, going back to what I was saying in the beginning, what happens when we lose what makes up our identity, when we lose our land and then our language and then our culture? What happens to us? And at first I was looking at that through figure, and now I'm actually writing about that rather than trying to put all that weight of meaning and content into the image. So I'm actually thinking of these drawings as eventually going side by side with text. But I also think graphite is romantic. I think, yeah, dust. It's making an artwork out of dust. And I try to give the images texture that reflects that. I hope that answers the question again.
Diego says, does the text happen in the planning or simultaneous to the making of the drawing?
So right now I'm making them both, thinking about each other, but separately. So I'm writing and I'm drawing, and they're not, I mean, I'm thinking of combining these in some kind of book of graphic memoir. So at the moment, I just approach each one separately, but they're always in my mind. Whether I'm drawing, I'm thinking of my writing, and if I'm writing, I'm thinking of my drawing. But ideally, I would combine these together, all, not just these, and anything I make in the future with text that I'm writing alongside it. yeah.
I wonder about like this, because you speak a lot about, you know, like even the titles are like kind of loaded, right? They
Yeah.
carry a lot of like references.
Yeah.
So I wonder the relationship between language and the image itself. Like how do you, when you're writing versus when you're like drawing and versus when they're together, right?
Yeah, so again, like I said, I often start with an idea and that idea becomes a title. And then I think of the image that I think would represent that notion. I mean, for me right now, these notions or these titles are either a way of highlighting that tension between the real and the fabricated, or it's a way of thinking, reminding maybe, or hinting at those thematic notions of home and ground and country and language and heritage. So yeah, in the titles, I try to either think about that tension or to refer to these notions. In the text, I have maybe more space to explore these narratives because I have language. So I can tell a story, I can write an idea, I can do whatever I want, and it could give you a new way of looking at the drawing or at the image. But I have not combined them yet.
Mm-hmm. There's one thing that we spoke about as well with regards to like this reference that we spoke about Achille Mbembe with regards to like his idea of how we need to intercept like this idea of modes of measuring and modes of seeing and how it changed with the introduction and the overwhelming abundance of like machine-made images. Mm-hmm. And that these have become sites of domination, and we as humans need to intercept these modes to mm-hmm. make them work for us versus mm-hmm. work for different futures that extract or push or marginalize people, right? So mm-hmm. I wonder like your thoughts with regards to that, and what kind of modes of seeing are you working or trying to achieve or intercepting in the work that you're doing?
I agree with you that, I mean, I assume that's your point. I agree with you that we need to kind of, I don't want to say fight back, but like not just let the machine take over everything so quickly. But at the same time, I think we need to, you know, understand that these tools are here and we have to not just not only are they there to fulfill our very immediate interests, there are maybe ways that we can look at them differently and that we can think about them differently, and that we can utilize them, like you're saying, to our advantage. But also technology inspires art. You know, how can we be inspired by what this technology is offering us? Honestly, when it comes to AI, I have a very hard time like figuring that, like thinking about that, because for the most part, it's a little bit still smarter, like more than maybe my cognitive abilities. But I personally just take it back to the tactile and to the physical. And maybe not everyone needs to do that. For me, it's just, I'm just built that way. I'm more analog. I need to have the pencil in my hand. I need to spend time with the work. I need to look at it in space. I think we need to be aware and be cautious and think about what are the not so immediate ways that these tools can be utilized.
I mean, let me see if there are some like if someone has some final question to ask, and I have also maybe we can take. Okay, لحظة. Also, Diego has some other question. No. Okay. So maybe we can open it for a final question. And I have a final question as well to ask you with regards to the clusters. So how do you see these clusters? Are they existing in space and time? Are they real? Are they virtual? Like what kind of, like your definition of cluster, right? Because we know cluster in relation to 3D imaging has its own kind of specific network of power and how things kind of relate to each other. I wonder how you bring it back into your process and redefine that and how you see them. Because there were some interesting clusters that you also showed us.
Yeah, let me go back. So I think for me, it's not real and it's not physical. It's maybe creating almost collages of objects that were never together or maybe never belonged together. It's being able to access again a world of scans online, different people peering into objects and lives that have no relationship to maybe where I am currently in time and space, and putting those together in new ways, and then going off of that. So no, for me, it's that potential of breaking the limitations of time and space that I find kind of exciting about this, because I can scan a place in, I don't know, in Syria, and I can put myself there in the virtual world. I mean, it's not real, but it's a twisted romanticism of wanting to be somewhere but not being able to do it. But then the digital shell can do it. So no, for me, it's about exploring what narratives can be created through this ability now to kind of lead a life in a digital version, and combine objects, archive objects from all over the world, from all kinds of people, and put them together in ways that could never have been possible.
I mean, I love this idea of like narratives that are being created digitally and how objects are being combined from all over. And I think that is an interesting, inspirational notion to stop our talk at, because it doesn't seem we have additional questions. Arturo's. Okay, so Diego says, Sawsan, thank you very much for your presentation. I am quite moved by your work. Do you see your work as quietly subversive?
Can you elaborate by what you mean by quietly subversive?
Hopefully Diego is listening in.
All right, let me just say it so that it's easier instead of typing it. So you are talking a lot about, fighting the machine, and, you're talking about like your own cultural context and how you see time and space being, seen within this particular context. And I'm seeing the image that you have in the screen of you inserting yourself in this space in Syria. I think that it's that we cannot access, right, because of the different conflicts. So that's what I mean by like, your work being quietly subversive, apart from, the process itself of taking the image from a digital world back into the physical world in this almost painstaking process. That's what I mean.
Yeah, so that's what I wanted to clarify, whether you meant, which notion you meant, because I think it might not be quite visible in drawings, but there is a kind of, let's say, refusal of refusal of place, an inability to connect, and so seeking something else, searching, like I was saying earlier, for familiarity of objects that are meaningful, that are homely. So I mean, I just don't necessarily see it coming out in the drawings. It does come out in the writing. I write about this a lot, like how strange it is to grow up waiting to go back home until home becomes a bedtime story and a myth. So yeah, there is undertones maybe of that. In terms of hand versus machine, believe it, like I am actually a contender for both. I don't actually think we could use, one or the other and one is better or not. That's why I called the talk drawings double, because I actually am trying to use them both together in a new way and create a new image and think about space in a new way and develop drawing in new dimensions. So I know I'm talking about destroying maybe the digital, but it's not so much in the grand sense as much as it's in the qualities of a drawing. It's in the making sure that when I'm drawing these by hand, I'm transforming them. So it's very process oriented way of thinking. And I am not against the machine, nor am I against the hand. I want to bring them together. Yeah.
Shall we see if anyone has any last additional questions? Okay, it seems we have exhausted you, Sawsan, with our questions. I wanted to say thank you so much, Sawsan, for agreeing to do this. Your work has inspired us, and I hope it has inspired the people that are present in the Zoom, but also later on when it's posted online. Seriously. And for more on Tashkeel, please follow us at Tashkeel Studio and at tashkeel.org. As I've mentioned in the beginning, Sawsan's talk is part of other talks that we're going to be presenting in our public program. So please join and see you next time. Thank you so much, Sawsan. Do you have anything else to add?
No, and thank you everybody for your questions and feedback and comments as well. And Hiba for exhausting me with very difficult questions, as usual. Yeah, and thanks Diego as well for your questions, and Leslie and everybody. It's great to be able to see how other people respond to your work and how they interpret it and how they respond to it. And preparing for this talk made me look at it again and think about it again in ways I hadn't before. So thank you, Hiba and Tashkeel, and thanks everybody for listening in.
Thank you, Sawsan.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.